Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Leveling Up with Federal Funding. I'm Heather Booth, audio editor at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. A link to today's slide presentation was included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download it, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link located there. You can also download the slides by copying the URL on this screen into your web browser. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or if you need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Last but not least, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select Show or Hide Subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting Subtitle Settings. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Angie Jameson and Ben Kowalczyk. Angie Jameson, MLIS, is in her 5th year of serving as a library media specialist at the Chagrin Falls Exempted Village Schools in Northeast Ohio, after spending 3 years teaching language arts and journalism. She earned her master's in library and information sciences from Kent State University in 2017. In 2017, IdeaStream named Angie Ohio Innovative Educator of the Year, and in 2021, OELMA honored her as a Collaborative Librarian of the Year. Jameson has a passion for building empathy through literature. Ben Kowalczyk is an account manager at Overdrive who works with schools in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia to implement digital offerings into their libraries and curriculum. His diverse background in marketing and sales allows him to offer unique solutions to partners looking for creative ways to promote their digital collections to students, teachers, and administrators alike. He enjoys cooking, reading, traveling, and loves spending time with his wife, their 4 cats, and their corgi, Murray. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And without further ado, take it away, Angie and Ben.
Hi, everyone. We're so happy to be here to talk a little bit about how we help Chagrin Falls Exempted Village Schools level up with federal funding. If we could go to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about Chagrin Falls. Ben will talk a little bit about Overdrive. We'll discuss the COVID-19 impact, the LSTA grant, and talk about how we're now going to put that into action in Chagrin Falls. Next. So I just wanted to take you through a little glimpse into Chagrin Falls, Ohio. Chagrin Falls is a tiny little town. Students and parents there call themselves the bubble. The enrollment for K-12 is just about 1,664 students. It's a very small, tight-knit community, and it's a very high-achieving district. I believe we were named in 2021 the 6th district in the United States for achievement. Next. So when I started serving as school librarian, Overdrive rolled out Sora, and it was introduced to our ITC in the summer of 2018. So in the fall of 2018, I implemented Sora in grades 4 through 12 and grades 4 through 6. This was done in traditional library classes, and grades 7 through 12, this was done pushing into English language arts classes. In spring 2020, COVID-19 and the remote learning time that we spent in Chagrin Falls really proved the value and the critical nature of digital texts. In summer 2021, we partnered with Overdrive to write an LSTA grant for $25,000. Next. During COVID-19, the impact that we saw in spring 2020, just like many schools around the United States and around the world, we had very little time to prepare for transition. We actually had less time than many neighboring schools because we were trying to be proactive, and we scheduled that Friday off from students to prepare when we didn't realize that would be the last day we would get to see students. So we were at even more of a disadvantage than we realized, and teachers really began to rely on digital text and resources like they never have before. So our PTO, which is our local parent-teacher organization, they dedicated all of their remaining funding to me to support the growth of our digital library, knowing that our students in grades 4 through 12 were really going to rely on this to maintain curriculum and to keep students busy during the summer months. Our parents really care about reading literacy. They didn't want to see learning gaps. They didn't want to see students falling behind. So they wanted to put all of this money into this area. So I wrote a local grant to justify this spending, but they told me, you would get this for sure. Just we needed the paperwork done. So that was a very low pressure grant writing situation. Next. So in the summer of 2020, this is a picture of our book club. And you can see we had a pretty decent sized book club. We used some Sora titles, including From the Desk of Zoe Washington, to just get students together, engaged. So you can see here we have Janae Marks, who led our book club. We had someone from the Innocence Project, and then we had a professional baker come talk to our kids. And this was some of our best programming that we've ever executed. Students and parents loved this. And we weren't able to do this through the local bookstore like we typically would in the summer because they were having supply issues. So Sora really came through. And again, this was just building the narrative for our school that digital text can keep us together and can keep us learning. Next. This is an example of what we were promoting. So we ran this 3 times. We ran it with our middle school, we ran it with our intermediate school, and then we ran it again with our middle school without our speakers because it was so popular. So if you want to check out our summer programming, I do have a copy of the slide deck that I used. Feel free to use this however you see fit. It's got some activities, some talking points, and it was a really great book. Students loved the audio book, which they were able to get on our Sora platform. So this was just one example of how we were building the momentum for digital text because, of course, a lot of parents, they still want their children to hold a book in their hands. So I needed to prove the value for not only digital e-reading, but also audiobook listening and how that can be really impactful. Next. So during this school year, last school year rather, when we came back, we were in a hybrid model. So we would see some students, half the day, we would see other students on Zoom only. And then we had a very high number of COVID-19 cases run through our district. So we had very high quarantine numbers. We had very high numbers of students who were at home battling the illness. We had really a hard time with this, especially in the fall leading up to our remote learning experience in the winter. So as you can see here, I have a screenshot of some emails. We were having trouble keeping students in school. So we were definitely relying on these digital texts, and now teachers trusted this. They knew that I could work into my budget what they needed. So I have a picture here of a student who wanted to listen to an audiobook while he was reading, and that became really popular last year because we did see some learning gaps and we saw students really falling behind in reading in general. And so audiobooks were a great way for them to build their confidence back up and to stay on track. Our students really became distracted in a way we've never seen last year. So as we faced this huge deficit of time with our students, Sora really helped us keep our students connected, especially as we roll out a new curriculum that is known as the Lucy Hawkins Units of Study, which is based on having independent reading and focusing students on reading volume rather than whole class novels. So we would not have been able to really get through the year last year had I not set aside some of my budget for digital texts. Next. So when we had our virtual academy and quarantine students, I was getting emails like this every couple of hours, teachers asking for me to connect students with different texts, different audiobooks for different classes, whether that was social studies, English at the 7 through 12 level, you name it. Teachers were really relying on us, but I did not have an unlimited budget. So there were times where, or I didn't have a PO ready, or there just were some obstacles that I faced last year. So while I was able to help a lot of our quarantine students and many of our virtual academy students, there were times where I wasn't able to get teachers and students what they needed when they needed it. And that no one likes to feel that way as librarian. We want to help people when they need the help. So that's when I realized I needed to get something else going, because this wasn't going away, the experience with virtual and quarantine students. Next. So this brings us to this last summer, and this is how our partnership with Overdrive resulted in federal funding to support our students through an LSTA grant, which is why you're all here listening, to learn a little bit more about how you can get some federal money for your libraries. Next. And you could take this away.
Yep, I got it, Angie. Thank you. Good job so far. So this LSTA grant, this was made possible through the Institute of Museum and Library Services through the State Library of Ohio. I found out about this grant through actually another school that was applying for it, and I sent a message to a bunch of my partners that I work with, Angie being one of them, and basically encouraged as many as I could to go ahead and apply, and we would offer support. A little bit of background about this grant. There's really three ways that that these funds can be used through these LSTA grants, or through the funds that LSTA provides. One is supporting in-house initiatives for LSTA. Another is supporting larger statewide initiatives, and then also these competitive grant programs. And so this particular grant was, I believe, an outreach grant, and I just basically, encouraged Angie to apply, and then we stepped in and assisted, once that time came up for us. Next. And I will pass this back on to Angie.
So if you're librarians in the attendee room and you're watching, you probably felt similar to the way I felt last summer. After a year, we were calling it in our district trauma teaching. It was a really hard school year for us in a lot of different ways. So over the summer, many of us unplugged. So I get a lot of listserv emails. I wasn't really thinking about school, and I wasn't really planning for next year. And those are all things that I typically do during the summer, but I was really unplugging. I wasn't checking my emails as frequently. I got a lot of emails about this grant that I ignored through various listservs I participate in. But when Ben continued to follow up with me, that is when I decided, okay, I guess I should go for this. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Ben reached out and encouraged us to apply. I ignored him for probably a month. Again, I was hiding from emails. I was hiding from work. But then Ben followed up to provide supports and check in on process. And that's when I was like, okay, I guess I am going back to school. I do need to do this. So with the gentle and kind pushes from Ben, I decided to write the grant, and then the Overdrive grant writer provided feedback and suggestions, and that was really helpful because I've never written a grant of this nature. So there were a lot of different things I didn't know how to approach, and she was very helpful. She was available over the phone at any time of the day. I have a toddler, and she was very understanding of the strange hours I wanted to chat with her, and that was really critical to our success in writing and receiving this grant. And had Ben not reached out, I wouldn't have gone for this. And I know many librarians around me didn't end up applying for this because they didn't have someone who was nudging them personally. When you get an email from a listserv, you're like, okay, I'll check that when I get back to school. But when you have someone saying, hey, Angie, have you started this yet? How's it going? What can I do for you? That's really when it goes from, thinking about it to doing it. Next slide, please. So some of the feedback I received from Overdrive that was really helpful, including student gap data. So I felt really uncomfortable with this because I wasn't able to access a lot of our student data, and they gave me the confidence to just write about the data I did have access to. So I had access to some 7th and 8th grade reading testing scores, and that's the only student data I included because that's the only thing I was really confident in talking about based on what I had access to. Principals were out of the office when I was writing this. It was during the month of July when all of our principals take their break. So I couldn't say, hey, can I have this data from these tests? I just had what I had. So that was really helpful, knowing that it can be a really small sample of data as long as you have evidence of gaps when you're asking for money to support a student need. The Overdrive grant writer also pushed me to go for $25,000 when I was prepared to ask for maybe $5,000. I thought that was a big ask. And in my mind, if I asked for too much, they would just say no. But I'm glad that she pushed me to ask for 25 because that's what we were approved for. And another piece of feedback from Overdrive was just making sure you're aligning your district goals to the goals of the organization fulfilling the grants. So I spent a lot of time reading about the Ohio State Library and what they wanted to do with this money and making sure that the way that I wrote it aligned with our district goals. Next. So I spent only 4 days writing and revising. Like I said, I was procrastinating. I was a little bit in denial about going back to school. So I spent many hours during those 4 days, but I didn't let this take up my whole summer. I wrote a 1780 word count proposal, and I ended up being selected to go down to the library board meeting to talk about the grants. Only 3 people out of all of the recipients were invited. That was probably the toughest part of this. And I could have said no, and that wouldn't have impacted our grant status, but it was a very intimidating situation. People were sending their deputy PR directors from their big public libraries to speak. And then I felt like little old Angie from Chagrin Falls Public Schools came to talk. So that was the most intimidating part of the process, which was something that was completely optional. Next. So the district support that I needed, I sent a note to my principals saying, hey, can I do this? And they said, yes, go ahead. So that was the only support I really received from them. And then at the end of the grant process, I had to have a signature from my school treasurer's office, which was kind of hard to hunt down because I didn't realize I needed that until the very end, and I was submitting the day it was due. So I had a school secretary hunt her down, and that really helped us because we were able to submit the final application. Next. So this is our grant timeline. So during the first time I spent working on the grant, late July 26th through July 30th, I wrote the grant, I revised it, I submitted it. From July 30th to September 13th, I just was waiting to hear back. I really wasn't too optimistic because I felt like everyone would probably be going for these, and I didn't receive the small grant that was given out last year for PPE and things like that. They ran out of money, so I thought, okay, this is probably going to be a similar situation. But then on September 16th, I went down to the State Library Board meeting. I defended the grant. It wasn't really a defense, but it kind of felt like that, and it was approved at the State Library Board meeting. By the 27th of September, the grant paperwork was shared with our district. On October 6th, my school board approved of the grant, signed the paperwork, which we sent back. And on November 1, we can begin spending the grant money. And by March 22, we need to have all of that grant money spent. Next. So the next steps, how we're going to roll this out and how we'll spend the money. Next. So when I wrote the grant, our grant writer from Overdrive helped me kind of do a breakdown. She said, you need to be really specific. So I have each of our schools here, our elementary school, which I have not rolled Sora out at yet. I'm asking for different genres or different types of texts. We also are in a time where we felt that a diversity audit for our collection was really important as we build collections. So each building's working on doing a diversity audit to make sure that we're covering all of our students and all of their various needs and making sure we're representing every student in our district. So we're definitely putting money for every school into that effort to make sure. We've done that with our print collection, but we've not done that with our digital collection. So that's been a fun project for some of my library interns to work on. And then we broke down by genre because we felt like that was what was most aligned to our curricular needs, which again, go back to the Lucy Hawkins units of study. They have book clubs, they have different genres that they study to do different units. So that made the most sense for me as I was writing up the spending breakdown. So this is what I'll be expected to use in the way that I've asked for the money. Next. Audiobooks, especially at the 7 through 12 level, I've realized that our students really like audiobooks as a support for class texts, especially as they're reading different texts. traditional all class novels, a lot of times when you're teaching that, and I used to teach this way, you would, read a chapter, talk about it, make sure everyone understood every single plot point. So it was really, really hard to fall behind. But now in our district, we're pushing for reading volume with the Lucy Hawkins units of study. So we're not always doing those check-ins and those plot checks. So our students are having to take they're held more accountable for understanding what they are reading, and audiobooks have been helping a lot of our students. And these aren't just students who have audiobooks written into their IEPs or students who are on 504 plans. These are high achieving students. These are middle of the road students. These are many, many students. These are also our teachers. Many of our teachers have asked me, hey, can you please get this on audio? I need to review it before I talk about it with some kids. I want to make sure that I'm fresh on it for this book club study. And it would really help me if you had an audiobook available. So there's been a huge push for audiobooks in our district since we've rolled out Sora. We used to use playaways, which were fun. If you remember the little, portable MP3 players loaded with books, but those have kind of fallen with popularity as many of our students have devices. All of our students in the district have a device. We are a one-to-one school with Chromebooks, but in such an affluent district like Chagrin, many of our students have cell phones, even in grades 4 through 6. So those students are able to listen to audiobooks from their phone from the Sora app. So that's been something that we've definitely decided we're going to dedicate some funding to. Next. We're also going to roll out Sora Day. So I'm going to bring some of our 7th through 12th grade library interns, and those are students who just love the library and want to help in any way they can. We're going to bring them down to our elementary school where we're going to have a big celebration, a Sora Day, where I don't know what we're going to do, but PTO is going to get involved. So there will probably be a giant Sora man at the entrance of the school. I'll definitely take pictures and send to Overdrive, but we're going to do a huge rollout day for our K through 3rd graders since they are new to Sora. We've also decided, if any of you are already Sora schools, we are going to transition to Google single sign-on, so our students in grades K through 3 can easily access their accounts, because we have found that some of our students, even at the middle and high school level, have trouble putting in a 4-digit birthday code. So just to make it a little easier for them, that's our plan for that. Next. I'm also partnering with our marketing class for the first time ever to have them market Sora titles for leisure and for, academic. If they want to suggest an audiobook, I'm going to write a blanket PO, so I'll be able to purchase audiobooks when the student wants one. So this is a picture I took in the library of some of our marketing students brainstorming for different ways that they're going to market our products. So they have some ideas, including making videos, making websites, doing digital designs using Canva. They want to help me with my social media. And they're definitely looking at the School Stars contest, which Overdrive promotes, to kind of draw some ideas to see, because they're very competitive and they want to win something and be involved. So I guess the circulation stats aren't enough for them to get excited. So they will be trying to enter that contest through Sora, the School Stars contest. Next. I also wanted just again, to prepare for Lucy Hawkins support. Our students are all reading different texts. We have huge, beautiful classroom libraries. Some of our students aren't comfortable touching those and sharing books. Some of our students still want to see books quarantined. So as you can see here, this is our map of COVID numbers through the beginning of the pandemic through now. So as you can see here, if you compare September and October to last year, our numbers are significantly higher this year. And so we have many of our students are vaccinated. I want to say close to 75 to 80% of our eligible students are currently vaccinated, which is great, but we're still seeing some quarantines and we're definitely seeing some breakthrough cases. So as I watch this trend, I know that there's going to be students who can't access our library books in the classrooms or in our school library and who will be relying on the Overdrive titles. So again, I'm just going to set aside some money for people who, Angie's out for 2 weeks. She needs to have X, Y, or Z text in order to participate in her book club and her independent reading for the Lucy Hawkins unit of study that she'll be missing. We don't want students to fall behind. So this is something that I want to be prepared for this year, a little better than I was last year. Next. Some takeaways. I'll talk about what I walked away with. So our K through 3 rollout. I wasn't planning to do a rollout or this year, I guess, our K through 3 building. They were relying on Epic. They were relying on some other programs that they were really comfortable with. But now I'm able to really sell this, and our principal gave us the green light. Yes, we will. We'll give it a go. We don't think it's too mature for our K through 3. So just having all of this money, then let my principal know we can support your teachers and your students. So let us give this a try. Where she was a bit hesitant because she had things that were working already. So this will really help us just broadening this out to our entire district. Next. Awareness, so confidence boosted. I'm definitely going to try for some mini grants after attending the state library meeting. They talked a lot about how they just sit there and they're just hoping that people apply for the mini grants, which are up to $5,000. So I've already got some plans in the works for mini grants I will be applying for. So that was really helpful to hear that at that meeting, that they desperately want school libraries to apply for these mini grants. So that's a big takeaway for me. Support, our school admin, our school board, and our community, they were really pleased to hear about this grant. And in the time, where not every school has a school librarian, it's always good to make sure that you're, showing what you bring to the district. So this was very healthy for me to bring to our district right now. And local grants. I can continue to add to my collection with local and mini grants. So I plan to do that. I want to have a great digital collection as our students grow older and older. I noticed they're more willing to try digital reading. Many of our students have grown up with a Chromebook since they were in kindergarten. So we're seeing a shift from the traditional need to hold a book in our hands to the willingness to try using some digital reading. So I want to make sure I'm keeping that up to date, even when all of the grant money is spent in March. Next. Support of LSTA group. I just wanted to emphasize how helpful they were. I didn't receive help from them, but all of the other people who spoke at the library board meeting just praised them so much. They talked about long phone calls, meetings with them, how helpful they were. They will help you write the grants in a way that it will be approved. So I had never thought about calling, the people who were going to be looking at the grants asking for help. But what I learned was they're overwhelmingly helpful and they want you to succeed because then they're succeeding. So if you're nervous about writing one of these grants, definitely reach out to the group awarding the grant and ask for help. They might be able to give you some insight you hadn't considered. So that was something that was really a takeaway for me. I'll continue to ask for help. Sometimes we want to do things on our own, but I think it's a lot better when we can get help from the people who are going to be approving these grants. So that's a big takeaway for me. Next. So Overdrive Partnership. The feedback from the grant writer for me was critical. My confidence was low going into this. Like I said, last year when I submitted something similar at a much lower ask, I was denied. They had run out of their monies. So I was nervous. I was not confident, but the feedback that I received from Overdrive and the grant writing team was so helpful. And I think without them, there would have been no chance to receive this grant. So making sure you're partnering with someone to help give you some insight. And these are people who are trained on writing grants. I have a little bit of experience, but that's not my entire job. So I'm Overdrive hugely for their help with writing the grant and revising the grant. Next. So I hope that you're sitting in your seats right now looking for different grants you can apply for, and I suggest that you go for it. I see a question in the chat. I'll address that in a moment here. But I hope that you'll feel confident enough to ask for help. You don't have to do it by yourself. Give it a try. The worst they can say is no, and then you can go back at it and try for something else. I've written grants, many grants that I've been rejected for, so you just got to get back out there. But with the positive experience that I had with this, I would say if you're on the fence, you should definitely go for it. I'm going to address a question that I have here. Sora is accessible through Chromebooks in the browser. Yes. We also had our technology team push out the Sora app onto the Chromebook. So it sits right on the student shelf at the bottom as an application. So there's many different options for that. But yes, you can go right from a web browser to Sora. All right. Now Ben's going to talk a little bit about the different funding that you can look into.
Thanks, Angie. Every time I hear you do a presentation, I feel like I learned something new about Overdrive and how schools can use it. So thank you. So before we get to the next slide, I just want to touch on something that Angie mentioned that was very, very important, I think, to take note of. Because I was at a trade show recently at a school near Columbus, and was kind of talking about this this great story with Angie's school, and brought up the LSTA grant. And another actually retired librarian said the exact same thing Angie did about the support that LSTA can give, and that their office, just basically is waiting to give support to schools that are going to be asking or applying for these grants. She even went as far to say that there's a person in the office that will accept drafts of grants, edit them, send them back to the school, say, cut this out, include this, and this instead. And so they really, really do try and help and encourage schools to win these grants, which I thought was really amazing to hear. And I'm glad Angie mentioned it. Next slide, please. So this was a great example of seeing an opportunity for extra funds and jumping on it. These opportunities can be hard to find or come across sometimes. I know that I didn't really see this grant publicized at all up until another school mentioned it to me. But this also can make your chances of landing one of these opportunities very high then. Chagrin was actually one of only 3 schools that was awarded a grant. The rest were all public libraries, but from this round of grant funding that LSTA was giving out, there was only 3 schools that were awarded funds, were awarded any amount of money, and Chagrin Falls actually was awarded the most of any of the 3 schools, which was great. So I recommend checking the LSTA or State Library of Ohio website often. I'm checking it like once a month now. Set up a Google alert too, just for certain keywords to look for, so that you're kind of alerted when those grant opportunities come in too. But aside from grants, which is going to be kind of this next portion is what I'll talk about. Aside from these grants, you each have funding that's been allocated to your schools through the same monies that made the grant, like the LSTA grant, possible. So these came from ESF, so Education Stabilization Fund. There will be quite a few acronyms coming up, so you'll get a copy of this deck after, so you don't have to take furious notes, but just bear with me as we go through these acronyms coming up. So ESF is Education Stabilization Fund. So this is the pot of money that the federal government set aside back in March of 2020 to basically help support schools through the time of COVID. It was made up of 3 parts. ESSER 1 was part of the CARES Act. So this was signed into law right in March of 2020. It was $13.2 billion. If any of you out there got a CARES mini grant, that's what ESSER 1 was. It was CARES money. So then, and this was, ESSER 1 was basically utilized or intended to be kind of just a Band-Aid to see if this could help support schools at this time. They found out rather quickly that it was, especially once the new school year started, that this was not going to be enough. And so the CRRSA Act was signed into law on December of 2020. So this was ESSER 2. So this was an additional $54 billion on top of the $13.2 billion from ESSER 1 or the CARES Act. This round of funding was intended to stabilize or kind of bring us back to normal. Really, this was kind of the start of this money was intended to address learning loss. Learning loss is the term that the federal government put on a lot of the publications out there. It's what we've included in here just because it'll be an easy reference point. But we've also heard from partners and have been utilizing the terms either interrupted learning or unfinished learning. It's not as negative sounding as learning loss. It doesn't put it so much on the students and just more the situation that everyone found themselves in through COVID and through these school closures and hybrid times and everything. So this was in December of 2020. This was still not enough funding for the education system. And so in March of 2021, the American Rescue Plan, or ARP or ARPA, was signed into law in March of 2021. So this was ESSER 3. So this was an additional 126 billion on top of the 2 previous rounds of money. So this round was really intended for transformational change, basically get us to a spot better than where we were before COVID. Really importantly, to work on that gap or that divide in equity, with a large focus on low-income families, children living with disabilities, your English language learners, your racial and ethnic minorities. And a note about this round, this ESSER 3, 20% must be reserved by the local school districts to address learning loss or interrupted learning. So automatically 20% of the allocated funds for your district have to go towards learning loss. Next slide, please. So there are 3 broad uses that basically align with what Angie and I have been talking about, and also align with the functionality of Sora, the student reading app that Angie referenced. So first is purchasing educational technology. So this is very simply, the hardware for students. So your devices, your laptops, your iPads, things like that. Software. So any digital applications for getting textbooks or works to your students and teachers, or also just broadband connectivity. A lot of schools added hotspots for students over the past year with a portion of these ESSER funds. The other 2 buckets of kind of uses really focus on ethnically diverse populations and achieving equity in schools, which was really kind of the driving question or goal of how to support schools during this time. The goal of especially ESSER 2 and 3 was on these diverse populations. So one was address learning loss among students. So this was just differentiated instruction and different activities to kind of meet the needs of students best. And then also summer learning and then after school programs. So adding additional staff, adding or bolstering your library during summer or during after school programs to help kind of resist that summer slide that happens a lot during the school year, to kind of not have that go against you, but really take that and build that momentum to take you into the next school year. Next slide, please. Okay, so who gets what money is usually the first question that we get when we're talking to schools about this. So the way that this money was kind of devised or split up, the federal government decided how much each state or SEA, so state education agency, was receiving for ESSER. Each SEA then assigned the funds to each district in the state. But the state has the right to, and most states did, they reserved up to 10% of the total allotted funds for the state to address emergency needs. And so, and I know in the state of Ohio, they used it for a special broadband program, a portion of that 10%. And a lot of states did something like that. So with these funds that are split up and available to your districts, the district still must apply in order to receive the allocated funds. So they don't apply to see how much funds they're going to get for the district. The district has a set amount of funds set aside. It's just telling the state how you're going to use it. And so, and each state has their own application process. So I know that the state of Ohio is different from Pennsylvania, who's different from West Virginia. Those are the states that I work with. So each state is a little bit different. Private schools, a note about them, they can receive this funding if you're at a private school, but if you're at a for-profit school, you are not eligible to receive this funding, unfortunately. So if you're not sure where to find your state's allocation or application, reach out to us at Overdrive. We can help you to do that. Or visit this webpage and this QR code here. This could help direct you as well. Next slide, please. So another note about these allotments. The allotments are based on 2019 Title I Part A allocations. So basically what your district was getting for Title I funds, they basically took that percentage and then applied that to the amount of ESSER funding available. And that's kind of how it was broken up. So this is an example, this website kind of down at the bottom there of this slide, this Tableau site from the United States Department of Education outlines the breakdown of funds for every state, and then you can actually search your specific district also. And this is pretty typical, this breakdown for the state of Pennsylvania, where ESSER 2 is listed at 2.2 billion. And then ESSER 3 is 4.9 billion. ESSER 3 is generally 2.2 times what ESSER 2 was. And so this is pretty typical breakdown. So for your district, whatever your ESSER 2 money is, ESSER 3 is going to be 2.2 times that. Next slide, please. So a note about timing. This is kind of probably the second most common question we get when we're talking about timing with ESSER. Number one is, why haven't I heard of this? Is the first question I get. And then also, are we too late? So the answer to the second question is no. Answer to the first is, a lot of these conversations happen kind of with upper level administration. So if you are a librarian or a media specialist, most librarians and media specialists I talk to have not heard about ESSER funding until we mention it, or until another company like ours kind of brings it to their attention. So you're not missing out on you're not doing anything wrong. It's just librarians aren't told about this, and that's kind of why we're here, and that's why we're doing this webinar. So a word about this timing. So ESSER 1 was again distributed back in March of 2020, but schools have until September of 2022 to obligate the funds. Obligating the funds basically just means that you are giving the way that you're going to spend the money. The money isn't necessarily spent by then, but you're telling how you're going to spend those funds. Most of these ESSER 1 funds have gone already to PPE for a lot of schools. So I know that for the state of Ohio, if you go to the website from the QR code a couple slides back, the ESSER 1 funding, I think like 71% has been utilized. ESSER 2 was maybe like 5%, and ESSER 3 was not even a percent yet. And so there's still funding out there. There's still, you're not behind the game at all. ESSER 2, those funds need to be obligated by September of 2023. So another year past ESSER 1, and then ESSER 3 is September of 2024. So most schools have not dipped into ESSER 2 or 3 at all. Most schools that we talk to have not. They might have a plan for them. So they might have an outline where it says, they're going to use 20% for learning loss. Okay, so you're going to use it for learning loss, but what does that mean? Like, what exactly are you going to use it on to combat learning loss? Is that staff? Is that physical books? Is that digital books? Is that remodeling the media space? That is the type of question to kind of follow up with if you're told, hey, these funds are allocated already to X. And also a note about the funds that are left, ESSER 2 and 3, that haven't really been utilized yet. That's the bulk of the money. So that's about $180 billion that's out there. And that's the bulk of the money that your district has to utilize. Because remember, it was 13 and then 54 and then around 120. And so yeah, I mean, this is the money that you want left over, because it's the most that's available to you guys. Next slide, please. So how we can help. We can definitely help you find opportunities that are out there. We can reach out. I would also suggest reaching out to your local library systems. We can do that as well, because we have an education component to Overdrive and then a public library component, and we work very closely together. So we can reach out to our public library counterparts and say, hey, we have a school that's interested in finding out if there's any grants in the area or in the state. What have you heard? Can you make some emails? Can you make some calls? So that's something that we're happy to do. Also, as Angie has said, grant writing support. Our grant writer is amazing. I mean, I don't necessarily suggest this, but she can work with a very fast turnaround. you heard that Angie said it was about 4 days worth of kind of work, but it was very, very condensed work. And so obviously the more heads up we get, the better. But yeah, I mean, we were able to kind of turn around that support for Angie real quick. Also have done it for a couple other schools I know of too. So even if it's getting late to a deadline, don't hesitate to reach out. You might be surprised that we're able to still offer support. And then also, we have a collection of proposals that we can reference and repurpose for your specific needs. So that's how we're able to kind of turn those around so quickly. So even if you're looking for examples of what to write or examples of what schools have done, we can offer that to you as well. Next slide. And then finally, this ESF resources page from Overdrive. So I can't stress this enough. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your Title I person, your curriculum director, your academic resources office, find out who is managing the dispersion of these funds, and then also visit this webpage to get ideas for how to advocate, and then reach out to us. That is basically a very loose and easy to follow plan. Find out who is managing the funds. Go to this webpage to find support in how to advocate for them, or I'm sure there's other websites out there like this that we have that kind of offer guidance on it, and then reach out to us or reach out to your other vendors for help. You know, obviously we would love every school to use their federal funding on Sora and on Overdrive, but at the end of the day, the real goal of ours is to just get kids to read more. And so so for us, that just means that libraries are able to secure funding for them, this federal funding. And the main focus of ours since March has been this work supporting our schools. You know, we know it can be an uphill battle and daunting task to ask for additional money. Looking at a grant application can be terrifying because it's a lot of work. I was surprised we were able to turn on the help we did for Angie. I was surprised that she was able to get it done too, because I know how busy she is. But you know, we're at a very unique time in history and education where you know, in the US, because there is this transformational money available to your district, the money is there. It is available to basically just ask for the district, for the libraries to use. These funds were set aside to address the needs of your students, particularly those that are marginalized or underserved. And really, you know, what better way to answer that question that every school consistently asks themselves, you know, how do I ensure I'm meeting the needs of every single student? What better way to do that than by using these funds to purchase resources that instill a joy of reading in those students you're trying to assist. Next slide, please. I think we're at Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Angie and Ben. This was fascinating, and I think grant writing, it often appears to be something that's big and difficult to attain, and it's going to take a lot of time, and it's intimidating, and who's got time for this when you're the only librarian in the building? So it's so wonderful to have this concrete example of exactly how it works. We do have a few kind of nuts and bolts questions that I think will be helpful to people who are watching, who might take this back to their administration and consider, you know, implementing a program like this at their own schools. First, Angie mentioned that students are listening to audiobooks on their cell phones and other personal devices, but obviously not all schools allow students to have these kinds of personal devices during the school day. Do you have any suggestions for either approaching administration with this need or workarounds for this, you know, the gap between having personal devices or having access to personal devices and wanting to access digital books, either print or audio?
That's a great question. So I would say a conversation, if you do work in a district where you believe students have the cell phones that they can use, is just explaining to administration what exactly you're going to help them with. You're going to help them download an app that can allow them to work maybe in their study hall on an English or social studies or for pleasure reading. But then your hope is that when they go home or when they're on the school bus or when they're on, the bench waiting for the next team to play if they're on a sports team and they have a long break before their game, that you're hoping that this will result in students increasing their reading volumes. You could also explain that you can track the reading volume, and maybe you could do a trial period where you do allow cell phones during recess, during study hall, or whatever that looks like in your district. Then you could prove that that's working. If you have administration who may not be supportive of that, or if you're working in a district where you don't believe students have cell phones, you can open the Sora app in 2 windows, and you can have students listening to an audiobook while they follow along with the text right on a device. So something to consider when you're writing this grant. Before I pass this over to Ben, maybe you want to allocate some of your funds to building the collection, and then you'd like to allocate some to having devices that students can borrow. So if you're not a one-to-one school, perhaps you would want to have 5 to 10 Chromebooks that students could check out, or iPads, or whatever that might look like in your district. Ben, go ahead and share some remarks, please.
Thanks, Angie. So yeah, I mean, those examples of kind of helping to kind of level set why personal devices would be a good idea in the school are great from Angie. That's what we've heard from a lot of schools, are those exact examples. And also a note about Sora, because I know there's different digital offerings out there. Sora also works at home. I know that not all digital offerings for schools do, or it's a charge on the parents to be able to access that at home. And so these Sora does work at home also. It's not just relegated to the school, and so a student can use it on their laptop at school per se, and use headphones in the Chromebook, for instance, and listen to an audiobook there. But then when they go home, they can download the Sora app via the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, and be able to put in their same credentials, keep and then pick up where they left off. It syncs across devices. Or same deal if they have a desktop computer or a laptop or an iPad at home. And so even if a device has to stay at school, but they have devices at home, there's going to be no gap in being able to access that content.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much. A few more questions that came in regarding the grant writing in particular. So for somebody who's never written a grant before, what content should be covered in the proposal? Is there a template or a structure, Angie, that you recommend for a first draft? The types of information that people should start gathering if they're considering applying for one of these grants?
So I would say that was the most intimidating part of this for me at the beginning. So if you're feeling like, wow, that sounds like a lot, I'm not a great writer, I'm not used to doing that, don't be too intimidated by that, because there are templates provided with almost every grant I've ever written, this included. So it has an outline for you, and you just kind of fill in the blanks. Like they asked, I'll read you some of the headings that the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 asked for: an abstract, a community library user and need section, where I talk about Chagrin, I talk about the need, I talk a little bit about some of my goals. Some of those included engaging and empowering learning experiences by teaching students how to research and identify books that are relevant to their own lives and experiences. Because I know that someone asked a little bit about some goals, so I wrote about that in that section. A project overview: what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? Some outcomes I'm expecting and hoping for. Sustainability: how will I continue building my collection once the grant runs out? A proposed budget, a timeline of events. So I would have felt very overwhelmed had I not had that template to work off of. And every grant I've ever applied for has had something like that, where I download and then I start filling in the blanks. Where Overdrive came in was to help me understand, Angie, you don't need to write 5 pages on this section. This can be a few paragraphs. Or when we think you need to add a little bit more in this section, maybe you could talk a little bit about the learning gap. So that's something that if you're going to ask for some of this funding, make sure you're working with your principals, your literacy coaches, your curriculum directors, maybe special education, to understand the learning loss and the learning gaps, because that is the goal of many of these grants, to fill those learning gaps. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think I definitely think it does. If you would, do you think you could expand a little bit on how you shaped your goals specifically? I loved how you mentioned that you work with other people in the school, and kind of the library, I see, then kind of became a conduit for school-wide goals. How do you decide what's a worthwhile goal?
So the way that I always approach goal writing is looking at the organization providing the funding, their goals, and finding how I can talk about how their goals are actually my goals too. So the LSTA 5-year plan had various goals outlined, and I was able to read over that and notice, oh, this is a goal that I have through implementing a new curriculum where we're trying to increase the volume of reading, or how we're trying to level the playing field for all students. So I read one of my goals. Another goal that I pulled out from the LSTA 5-year plan was to sustain access to knowledge. And then I was able to put a spin from our district on this in the grant. I wrote, each student has a personal device, such as a laptop or tablet, that they use at school and home. This device allows them access to the entirety of our school's digital library. Simply put, by adding to our digital collection, students can access knowledge and experiences at any time of the day during school breaks and when they are unable to attend brick and mortar school. So I don't write those goals myself. I pull the goals from the organization providing the funding, and then I align them, or I, add a little bit of our story and our narrative to support those goals. So I'm not starting from scratch. I'm always pulling from somewhere else to get inspired, whether that's my district goals or whether that's the funding partners' goals.
Kind of like when you see a job application, you look at what they're looking for and you say, I have that.
Absolutely, yes.
That sounds great. The sustaining learning seems so significant too, when you're talking about introducing Sora at the younger levels where they were comfortable with Epic and with other tools. Personally, I have a student who moved from a level where they were using things like that into a level where that's no longer accessible. And having something that is continuous through the different levels like Sora can be, seems like such a great way for that continuous learning to happen, especially during summer or, gaps.
Absolutely. And I addressed that in my proposal as well, especially the privacy of texts, right? So if we have students experiencing learning loss and they want to read the Big Nate series because that's what they're prepared to read and that's what they're able to handle at that time, they can check out Big Nate, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, whatever text that they want. And no one's going to see them carrying around a book that's more suitable for much lower grade levels. So thinking about social emotional pieces was big, I think, and helpful in my project proposal. I had that in my one pager, which again, that was a template where I just filled in some very basic information, but I know social emotional learning is as a big important factor in this school year and moving on from our pandemic and our experience with remote learning. So any way you can work in social emotional learning and protecting our students' well-being, I think that can definitely be helpful in your grant writing.
It's such a respectful way, I think, of viewing the whole project and students and integrating all of their needs with what you can provide through the library. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I'm not seeing any other questions, so we'll give it just a second to see if any more questions come in from our viewers. All right, I think we can move on. Thank you both so much for answering all those questions. And then Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect, thank you. So big thanks to Angie to doing this this presentation with me, and to Booklist, and to everyone that that stopped in to listen to us and to ask questions. The big takeaway, I think, from my end of things is that we're here to support you every step of the way at Overdrive. So from looking for grant opportunities to helping advocate on your behalf, to your administrators, to offering you resources, to assisting in writing proposals for you, to being part of those meetings, all of those steps we are happy to and want to participate in. And I think on Angie's behalf, don't sit on grants and don't be daunted by applying for them and just trying for them. As she said, the worst that can happen is they say no. The best thing that can happen is that you get some extra funds for your libraries, and I think that definitely outweighs the negative. Feel free to email me with any questions. Even if I don't cover your school or your state, I'm happy to forward on your questions to the account managers that do. And then also follow through those links in the deck to find out information on ESSER funding. It's still out there. Definitely find the amounts that are allocated to your district. Start asking questions to your staff, and then definitely reach out to us if you have any other questions.
All right, thank you both again for all of this fantastic and so useful information. On Monday, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, certificate of completion, and a video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. If you are not yet a subscriber, take this opportunity to pair the print reading experience with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com. Lock in print, digital, online, and archive access by taking advantage of this special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. Patron-friendly, librarian-approved, and free with your Booklist subscription. Booklist Reader, Booklist's new digital-only magazine highlighting diverse readers' advisory recommendations for all ages, has arrived. To see and share the latest issue, which is currently free to all, visit booklistonline.com/reader-issues. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. One more huge thanks to our panelists and to our sponsor, Overdrive. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.